Welcome to An Outside View. I'm your host, Dick Zaccaro, and joining me today is Selectman David Salvatore. David, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Nice.
David is now serving his second term, and I believe you have another year and a half left on your term.
That's correct, yep.
And hopefully we look forward to you when your term's up running again.
We'll see.
You're always a forthright, upstanding gentleman that I've known you for years. We appreciate your public service.
Thanks.
And you have the pleasure of serving with 4 other selectmen. There are 5 selectmen in town, correct?
That's correct.
And how about their tenures? Is anyone who's up for re-election this spring?
So usually,
June.
So I think Selectman Gallivan's up in June, and then I guess it's myself and O'Neill the year later, and then Selectman McKenzie and Barrett would be up the year after that. So because they just got elected this year. So.
Right. All right, let's get into some of the issues, Dave. As people know, we have 2 town meetings, one in the spring and one in the fall. Even though you're not an RTM,
that's correct.
You do attend the meetings faithfully.
I got thrown off, yes.
And we also encourage your feedback when you get up and speak on some items at town meeting, and we really appreciate your insight into it. Helps ourselves, me included as an RTM, getting some additional information, inside look of a selectman's perspective on these issues. So let's start off, talk about one recent issue that actually failed in the fall town meeting on the, at that time, I believe it was an $11 million ball field project up off Route 1A across from the prison. Failed to get the 2/3 majority vote. And then they revisited it again in the spring town meeting, this last spring town meeting. I'm sorry, the spring meeting it failed, but the fall meeting they revisited it. And it did pass, but there was some controversy on the vote. As you know, you were there, there was one voter who abstained. So they issued an electronic device, and the options on the electronic device, 1, if you're in favor of the ball fields, 2 against, 3 abstain. Then of course some people choose not to vote at all, so there was no vote, but not recorded. So the town clerk and the moderator referred to town council, who quoted in saying regarding a vote that abstained, that it counted for the quorum, but it did not count as a vote. So there's a group effort, concerted effort going on here to appeal that. And I have a letter that was sent to the town moderator, and they're appealing it on 2 grounds, basically. 1, whether or not that vote did abstain. Now, town council was quoted saying, she referred to a state statute that said how absentee ballots were impacted into a vote. Now, I personally called the Secretary of State's office, and others did as well. And I was informed that there is no state statute when it comes to towns, local towns and government, that it's up to the local town charter. So we had people research the town charter, and there was no language in there explaining how absentee votes were counted. So that was one issue. What's your take on that?
So, first of all, the vote on the fields required a 2/3 vote because it was a borrowing item.
Right.
And when you borrow, and you need 2/3 of 2/3 of the votes have to be in favor of the borrowing.
Correct.
In this case, it failed by like 6/10 of a vote, I guess is what it ended up being.
Right.
The issue becomes, what's the numerator and what's the denominator, right? So what is the denominator? What number do you count as the number of total votes?
Mm-hmm.
The argument in the letter that was addressed to town council or to the moderator argues that the denominator should be the total number of people casting votes, where the town council basically said it should be the total of people casting votes, either yay or nay.
Okay. In other words, the absentee, the person who voted.
The abstention,
right.
In that town council's statement is that the abstention should not be counted as one of the votes. remarkably, this vote was so close that that one abstention does make a difference, that if you add in the one extra vote to the denominator, the two-thirds
Doesn't
threshold
pass. Right.
is not made.
Right.
But, so, the fact of the giving of the electronic device to vote does not change anything as far as the voting.
Right.
There is a school of thought that this is what I feel is most prevalent out there, is that an abstention is the same as not voting at all. An abstention within the body of the town meeting is the same as the town meeting member who's still at home and didn't come to vote.
Right.
It doesn't change that scenario. So that the only reason we know that there is an abstention is because we've instituted electronic voting.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't really change the rule. So if it hadn't been for electronic voting and they did a standing vote, for instance, that when the yeses were called,
Right.
the yeses would stand up, and then the noes would call, the noes would stand up. The abstaining person would not have stood up in either scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you would have done was counted the total number of yeses and noes, and then take the yeses and divide them by the total number of
Right.
votes and come up with the 2/3.
Right.
And that's kind of what town council was saying.
Right.
So I don't know that, it was a tight vote. What bothers me more about the scenario is that, once again, the town has a vote, and then certain members of the town are not happy with the vote, so they go and redo it.
Correct.
It's interesting, when
Referring the fall meeting was voted down, and then they
That's
bring it
right.
back to the spring because they reduce it by 2 million and
Right.
figure it'd be looked upon more
and
favorably.
they're going to throw that they're going to come up with the 2 million later to fill in the things they left out.
Right. Right.
And it was incredible to me that Selectman Barrett and Selectman McKenzie, who won this last June, said, "Oh, this election was we were given a mandate to go forward with these fields." They actually didn't even want to compromise the numbers. They wanted everything.
Right.
And I don't think that the general public, we've often found that town meeting doesn't reflect the feelings of the general public.
Right.
For example, when we were looking for overrides for the police station, the fire station, and the senior center, town meeting overwhelmingly approved those for the override, but the general public overwhelmingly denied it.
Right.
So we know that town meeting doesn't necessarily reflect the public's interest. And that's a problem caused by voters not being engaged in the process and not paying attention to town meeting and town meeting
Right.
votes. But so that bothers me, that every time, when the library came up for a vote the first time in 2008 during the presidential election when Obama was on it.
Mm-hmm.
Probably election was probably the election where there's been the most participation in this town in decades. And it lost by 300 votes. I happened to be watching, flipping through the channels, and I stopped on the selectmen meeting the following Tuesday after the election. And they said, "Well, how are we going to get this back on the ballot?" It's like, you just lost. The people said no.
Right.
And they know better. They wanted to
Right.
get back on the ballot.
Right.
It was, in fact, that vote that, made me decide to run for town meeting, because I said, they're not reflecting what the people want.
Right.
And so, this attitude that the selectmen have and the leadership of the board, that we know better, we know what the people want, forget, and they'll just keep coming back at you until
Right.
they get what they want, I think is unfortunate, because I really think the public knew that this Fields project is an extravagant expense.
Right.
I actually they were looking for what are we going to do next? And I said, you know what? This proposal has 2 turf fields for youth sports.
Right.
Do we need 2 turf fields? Maybe one. It's a football size field. But 2 of them, it was certainly an extravagant expense. And they're expensive to maintain. Just for the high school field here, we put away $50,000 a year just to provide for the replacement. These things last, they have a lifespan of 10 years or whatever it is, and they have to be replaced. We have to put away $50,000 a year just for the replacement of the field. Now we're going to have to put away $100,000 a year just for the replacement of these 2 fields. I was looking for a more measured, okay, let's put a few, for the price of 1 turf field, you can put in 4 grass fields.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put in grass fields for now. Let's give the taxpayers a break. The taxpayers have spent $30 million over the last 5 years on new buildings.
Right.
And they're continually being hit with more. They said, well, it doesn't, there's a school building coming up. We're either going to build or repair a middle school. People say, well, and I've been saying, we shouldn't have been spending on new fields. We should have put the $2 million aside for, if I got rid of one of the turf fields, it's about $2 million. I said, put that away for the middle school. People say, oh, it's a different pot. It's a different pot. No, it's the same pot. It's our pockets. And, every dollar we don't spend on fields would be a dollar that we could use for the middle schools. And, I don't think people realize that, the taxpayers are just taking it on the chin.
Right, and this was not a small budgetary item. This was $9 million. That's 10% of the entire town budget.
And what's also amazing is we asked the police department to cut back on what they want, their wants for the police station. We made them cut back a couple of $1 million because we didn't have the money, but we have $9 million, $7 million for fields.
Right.
It just, the lack of respect for the taxpayers that this town has had for a very long time is distressing. And then we had someone coming before the board the other day and say, well, let's propose this where, we have a homestead exemption where the first $300,000 or $100,000 of value don't get taxed. And basically that would just shift, half the people, if you did that, half the people would pay less and half the people would pay more.
Right.
It's like, and the person, I said, well, wouldn't it just be better if we stopped spending? And of course
Absolutely.
they respond, oh, but we need to invest. Every time a politician says invest or quality of life, they're taking money from your pocket. And so that's what was distressing about this process. It's unfortunate lost by, 0.6 of a vote or whatever it was. I don't know if the ruling is going to be reversed. I don't see overwhelming legal evidence that
Right.
that abstention should be counted in the
Right.
denominator. But I do think we need to look forward at this point, and a majority did approve it. A third, just less than a third, didn't approve it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as a focus going forward, what we need to look at is, all right, we got this middle school coming up. Let's save as much money as possible. Enough spending. You've got 3 new buildings. You've got the fields. We have spent a lot of money lately. Let's start stocking some money away. So there's going to be a request for an override for the middle schools. And what I suggest we do is that we say, okay, we have a big pot of money here to help alleviate, that's already coming out of the taxpayers' pockets, that, reduce the amount that the override has to be. Reduce the amount, the amount of future pain that we're going to cause the taxpayers. And be very vigilant in filling that pot up with money. Everybody's gotten everything they want. They got the senior center, the police department, they got the fire department, they got the fields. They're thinking of new things to buy.
Right.
But we ought to be thinking about, putting money away for the taxpayer.
Well said, but just getting back to the ball fields, one more point. There's another contention here too about a vote that actually occurred at fall town meeting in Precinct 1. The chairman of that vote called for a vote by ballot, which is in the town charter. They overrode the chairman and they had a vote by voice and hand. So the validity of whether or not that was done properly is in question. But where we stand now is this group is trying to meet with the town officials, and they extended an opportunity for the town moderator who gave his opinion to them. But he refused to meet with them at a certain deadline. So it appears that they're going to challenge town council's interpretation on these two areas, and they might go to a court of law to get a judge's opinion on the ruling and try to get an injunction against the fields being developed till a judge rules on it. And it's my understanding they're breaking ground already there.
So there's a lot there. The vote itself, my understanding that, this is actually, the vote itself was actually more contentious because people were looking to make sure that whoever the new member of the precinct, that precinct, the new RTM, there was a group out there wanting to make sure that that person was going to be voting in favor of the fields.
Right.
And I'm told, and I don't know if this is true, but it wouldn't really surprise me very much that someone who was in favor of the field said, I want to know who voted
Right.
against
I heard
against me.
that was said right at that.
And I got to say that, I found that I've been in politics. My father was a city councilman for 8 years. Coincidentally, his first term, the day he got inaugurated, it was the same day that Buddy Cianci got inaugurated for his first term. And so I've been involved, and then I worked for the city of Providence for years. I've been involved in politics a long time, lots of elections. I find that some of the people in this town are very negative, they don't separate issues from people. They treat, if you disagree with them, you're a pariah,
Right.
And I don't, very aggressive on certain issues. I myself, I argue issues. If I fail on the issues, I feel like I failed the people because I feel, but I'm not, negative towards the people who don't agree with me. And so I could see pressure being put on by a vote like that, where if it's not a secret ballot, that people will pressure you into voting one way or another, and that's unfortunate. It falls on the town clerk. The town clerk should get it right and get it right every time. There's no reason. See, and all of these things create a cloud on the issue that, that's certainly unnecessary. These things need to be done in such a way that everybody respects the results and that we move on. But these two issues certainly have created a cloud over the approval,
Right,
and I think that's unfortunate.
And you do bring up a good point by saying that if they don't get something through one town meeting, they bring it up again. But I believe it was in the last spring town meeting, former selectwoman Ann Ragasta brought up the fact that where they had a surplus cash balance of $6.5 million, maybe credit the taxpayers back with a small portion of that, $1.5 million, where you wouldn't have to go up the full 2.5%. Yep. And that died, but no one brought it back. Maybe that group advocating a tax relief should bring it back, just like the other group advocating for the fields bring it back.
Well, I mean, I certainly think that when we have free cash, which is money that is no longer, that wasn't allocated to a particular purpose in a particular year, and maybe money that unexpected results, unexpected revenues. And this is part of a bigger issue, but to me, there's two things to do. Either give it back to the taxpayer, or in one way or another by lowering taxes or lowering future taxes, or paying down some debt that might be high rate debt. I mean, that's it's simple to me. What the town has done is that they purposely underpredict cash so that they have a bigger pot of money available as free cash, and then at fall town meeting they go on a shopping spree and they buy things. And they almost plan it into the budget. And the problem with that is, at the fall town meeting, when they're spending the free cash, the chairman, Gallivan for many years, and now O'Neill, they pick the project that it's going to be spent on, and you get to vote yes or no on the particular project, whether it's a new fire truck or a particular item that they want to buy. What I'd rather see is that all of this money be put in the pot during the whole budgetary process, so that people can make real choices between the school books and needs for the seniors, recreation department and needs for public works. Real choices, and not just, okay, here's some extra money, let's go spend it. And what ends up happening is town meeting spends this money at an increased rate because they're just given these choices, and then all the little advocacy groups, hey, well, I want that money spent over here. And the only person who gets to choose that is the chairman of the board, or the majority of the board of selectmen, and not town meeting itself or the finance committee, who really should be making those choices as to where this money should be allocated. So it brings up a whole systemic issue with the town and the way the budgetary process occurs.
Well, it should be interesting to see how this plays out.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure that, as we get the free cash for fall town meeting, I hope that, people will be looking at that money and saying, instead of spending it, let's say no to the spending. Whatever, see, and they don't even tell you, Mark Gallivan and Jim O'Neill, they have a plan where they're spending this money already. They're not going to tell us till fall town meeting, as late as possible. And what will happen is, but I'm urging, to tell you, town meeting representatives, don't spend it. Put it away for the middle school that's coming down the line. Let's just, and we got all of these new buildings coming online, all this new revenue that's coming into play for the downtown, these new apartment buildings and age-qualified village. We should be taking that money, not spending it right away, and putting that money towards this new school project.
Correct.
So that the taxpayers don't take as much of a hit.
That makes perfect sense. Well, again, it should be an interesting outcome. And then the other factor that we comment on, I had a couple RTMs on my last show, and we mentioned how the town moderator has a lot of power and handpicks the 15 finance committee members. And it seems like they're always voting either 15-0, 14-1 for their agendas they want. They set the articles on town budget to be debated, but there were a couple ideas thrown around. Well, maybe the finance committee members should be elected like the town moderator and selectmen and RTMs. And another issue, anything that constitutes more than maybe 5% of the total town budget should go on a referendum so the voters can vote on it. So those are some issues.
Yeah.
But let's move on to a couple other topics regarding spending and how it affects the ratepayers and taxpayers. I've had a couple guests on talking about that Jarvis Farm purchase, where the property was assessed at $750,000 and it was purchased for $4.5 million. Now, as a result, or maybe not as a result, but water rates are starting to increase as well. What was your comment? Do you think they overpaid for that field, and why?
Oh, absolutely. And water rate,
That farm, rather.
certainly a portion of what's in the water rates right now is the payments for Jarvis Farm. I mean, it's in there. One of the issues is revenues are based on usage, and there's been lower usage this last couple of years, partly because of less watering going on because of the nature of our weather and things going on. So there's less revenue, and then therefore they need to raise the rates. Maybe this will be a temporary thing because there's a lot of new toilets being put in downtown. Hopefully the extra usage there might help the tax, might help keep the rate down. Because a lot of our water costs, it's water mostly, the water costs are kind of fixed. The pumps, the cost of the pumps, the cost of the facilities, the cost of treatment doesn't change much depending on usage. A lot of that is a fixed cost. So when you get less usage, you still have to pay that cost. So now the per gallon price or per cubic yard or however they measure it has to go up because of those fixed costs. The sewer rates, we don't have as much control over because it's the state, it's the MWRA rates that we deal with. But maybe with the added usage, it'll change that. The other thing that I believe the board is working on, and it might be useful to get a couple of those guys on here, is doing a rate that higher and more intensive users pay more than the regular residential usage. So Siemens would pay more because they basically, the product that they produce there is mostly water. And so, they would pay a little bit more than a little higher rate than your residential user. And that may give us some relief on that. As far as the purchase of Jarvis Farm, it was amazingly, even an appraiser had come back at 1.2 million, and they ended up paying over $4 million. And it's still something that really bothers me. It's funny that getting two issues. The revote on the library made me run for RTM. The fiasco at Jarvis Farm made me run for selectman because it was just an irksome process. It really
right.
bothered me.
The home we live in, my son-in-law and daughter purchased right on Common Street, and the carriage house we renovated behind. Someone told me that was part of the Jarvis Farm at one point in time.
Oh, really?
Maybe I should ask my son-in-law if he wants to see if the town wants to buy it for 6 times more than what he paid for it.
Well, it's interesting. There's actually another. So Jarvis Farm, it already had a lot of protections and easements on it to protect our aquifer.
Right.
And so I'm not even sure that we needed to purchase it. And there's actually a document out there that they based the need to buy Jarvis Farm. It was a study, I think, I don't know, it's from the mid-90s or early 2000s, which said these parcels we need to watch these parcels because they directly impact our wells. Currently, there's an individual parcel off of Darwin Lane that is listed in this document. Jarvis Farm was listed 4th. Or the old Country Day camp was listed 4th on this list. This parcel is parcel number 1 on that list. Most important one, according to these scientists who said, this is one that you have to protect from development. The developer's trying to sell it to the town and they don't want it because I guess he's not as politically connected as the people who purchased the Sharon Day camp.
Right.
And he's offering it for 1/3 less. Those guys offered it for 3 times more, and they're still not getting any traction. So it's just amazing what happens when you get the same people in power year after year, that they don't answer to the people. And you really, the voters are to blame. The voters who don't show up are more to blame. Most to blame.
I couldn't
We
concur
only-
with you more.
We top off at like 5,000 of the 16,000 voters that show up.
Right.
But when you go out and talk to people in public, you know, they're unhappy, and then you look them up and you say, but you didn't vote. Like,
I agree. I agree with
it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Not only that, but the lack of media sometimes and factual stories. That's why one of the reasons why
Well,
you ran for
Walpole-
selectman, that I have a show. I try to keep the
Yeah,
people
Walpole
informed.
Times is gone. Don't even subscribe anymore. There's nothing in it. There's like, they fired the local reporter now. I don't know if they reassigned anybody. I haven't seen anybody at a
Right.
meeting. I haven't seen anything written. It's sad. It's really that no one's even paying attention. It even makes it worse.
And the Hometown Weekly is a friendly newspaper.
Yeah,
There's a-
yeah,
which is fine because
Right.
it's positive publicity for the town.
Right. The only way to get the word out now is like as a group, we've spent thousands of dollars putting inserts in the newspaper so we can get our story out. But otherwise, this last election cycle, they didn't even do candidate reviews. A local
Right.
group did it, which was great. They picked up the slack on that. But I don't think not everybody was aware of that. But the Waltime, they didn't even have, used to be at least you'd pick up the newspaper the week before the election, see what the candidates had to say.
Right.
They didn't even do that this most recent
Right.
time. It's sad.
Well,
Sad state of
I'm a
affairs.
strong advocate. As you, I've been in government most of my career, and I'm a strong advocate for open, transparent government. That's one of the reasons I produced this show, to give the people a media source to find out what's going on and keep people up to date on current events. That's the high school PA system where the studio is, unfortunately. We can't, maybe they can edit that out. But let's talk about another controversial issue with the train station coming in. I know I go on social media a lot and I hear a lot of people complaining that the whistle's loud, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a $22 million project that will actually transport about 37 people to and from their destination.
I happened to, I was over near the Patriot Place the other day, so I said, oh, let me see what the station looks like, and I went to the end of the parking lots near the train, and there's one little parking lot dedicated to the people that use the train, and I counted 37 cars. 37 cars, and the operating expenses of this train are upwards of $10 million. The recent renovations to the tracks that needed to be conducted because the tracks weren't rated for passenger transport, that was another $10 or $20 million. The purchase of the whole train line was another $30 million. It's been huge expenditure placed on this thing, and for 37 people. And if you read the preliminary documents for the pilot study, they even saw this project. They expected that they were going to cannibalize other locations. That a lot of passengers would come from other locations, and that they were expecting 93 new riders a day on this line. Even that was outrageous. But now there's 37 cars there. If half of them are new riders, I'd be surprised.
Right.
It's really terrible.
Now, do you think this was a ploy by Kraft to get more people to Patriot Place, or?
No, it's not really. It's funny they talk about reverse commuting. That
Right.
people are gonna come work at Patriot Place and use these trains. Well, first of all, the last train in this direction is like 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, and the last train out is like 4:30, 5 o'clock. Patriot Place is mostly a retail and restaurant location, right?
Right.
you may be able to get to work, but you're not going to be able to get home. So the reverse commuter is like, and they're not even charging reverse commuters, or they're charging them a real low rate. I'll have to see how many actually ride it. But to me, most of the reason people take the train is because they don't have parking at the other end, or parking is so expensive.
Right.
I mean, you talk to someone who lives in Boston that works in the suburbs, very often they're taking their car.
Right.
You know, and they're choosing to.
Right.
So I don't know, but what I do see Kraft is doing this for is, I'm sure he is going to develop a lot of residential housing, and then he's going to have the train station there. And now that the train station there, there's also a bunch of incentives for building housing around train stations. So he's going to get, whether it's, you know, loans or other incentives to build on that property. I think that's what he's looking for.
And will there be any windfall to Walpole?
Absolutely not. We, you know, the 53 residents along the train line who's suffering with the train horns and the train going past are all going to suffer on, you know, and Bob Kraft is going to be the winner. And it's interesting too that something that, you know, people in Foxborough said, oh, it's no problem, you know, basically the train's in Foxborough for like 200 yards. It's barely in Foxborough at all. They think this is a great thing. I think what they're going to do is make the train go in the other direction too. And it's got 5 grade crossings. I think what they're going to do is, you know, go the other direction. There's 5 at-grade crossings in Foxborough. So, and what also I saw in the news recently was that they want to have like 20 trains a day from Providence. I suspect that there's not enough room on the Stoughton line to go, that they're going to move it over to this line. And that's the master plan, to send express trains through that line, stop in Foxborough, and then express down to South Station. One other thing about the train line, you know, I do hear the horn. Sometimes I try to make myself think I'm on the Cape and it's a foghorn, but it's loud. It's loud. I can't even figure out which end. I'm like kind of in the middle between. They blow the horn at the Y at the Walpole station. They also blow the horn at Summer Street. Mm-hmm. I think I hear it on both sides, so I can imagine how the people close to it feel, and it's very loud. There's people talking about, can we get a silent zone? Can we reduce the noise? I might be willing to get behind that at some point, but for now, I want people to know there's a train coming. I think people have been going through those things, those sections, without, you know, for now, until we get everybody's mindset about the trains. I think the horns, unfortunately, and I know they start really early in the morning over on Schufelt and some of those spots. But for now, let's just look at it for a little while before we try and ask for the noise to go away, especially with the school kids. The nearby school, Boyden School, I really
where my
want
grandchildren go to that school.
Yeah, and I really want for now, let's just keep the horn the way it is, and we'll deal with
Public safety is the utmost importance. Serve and protect. That's the role of public officials.
Yeah, it's, you know, and there's no, I guess someone recently survived going through the gates and their car getting hit, but it's usually it's not a good result.
Right.
So.
Well, we have 20 minutes left. I want to spend some time with you on a rather contentious topic here that came up recently about executive sessions. Inadvertently, minutes of the meeting and notes from that meeting were put up on the town of Walpole's website, and they were immediately taken down when the error was discovered. and then some redacted minutes were issued. I have a copy of both in my hands that I'd like to ask you about, but could you explain to the viewers a little bit what this is about? And then
Sure.
I believe we have about a minute segment of a former selectmen's meeting where you made some very interesting remarks within that meeting.
It's interesting. So even, you know, this is, I was amazed about the secrecy and that has occurred. Deputy Chief McKenzie was on a 90-day administrative leave, and that expired on November 1st. And no one even noticed he was missing. It was amazing how long that lasted. Towards the end of that, I would say mid-October or so, people started to, like, you know, where's Mackenzie been, or what's going on? And someone went snooping around and looked at some minutes from a meeting, and it turns out that the finished minutes from, I think, the August 5th meeting were posted on the website. And down below were the notes of an executive session that occurred on that same day. I'm not sure if it's August 5th or August 6th. And what had happened?
August 6th, I believe.
August 6th. What had happened was that the secretary of the board types up as much as she can of what's going on at the meeting, right? She types on her computer and tries to get as full of a statement out. And then later goes back and turns it into a nice narrative and joins all the thoughts and turns it into finalized minutes. She had done that for the open session of the meeting, but the notes from the executive session kept getting pushed down. And when she posted the finished minutes, she had no idea that those notes were there, and so they inadvertently got posted. That did get posted on social media, and so then there was a meeting, and the chairman of the board, Mr. O'Neill, has control over the agenda, and he put on the agenda a discussion of a social media post of October 18th or something. Again, he didn't even say what it was really about. It wasn't about, you know, he refuses to disclose what those minutes were about or anything, or who the individual involved is. And so this is that discussion of that social media post.
Okay, we'll pause for a minute and let's play the tape so the viewers can watch it, and then we'll get back to you with some further comments.
With the board, who'd like to go first?
I would.
David.
What information is now available as a public record?
None.
I asked you previously in an email to have counsel opine on that issue as to what was public record and what was not. I reminded you on Friday that I still had not had an answer, and you're saying that counsel has opined on that, or is that your opinion?
I have not said that. I've said that what is public record is that we posted an executive session, and we had that executive session. I think that's the extent of what's in the public domain.
And you're not going to make any statement as to what has occurred to this point?
I am not.
You're not even going to make a statement as to what the current the police department chain of command is?
David, let me remind you again of the confidentiality rule here.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, Mr. O'Neill, you may shut me down, but you're not going to shut me up. This is something of such importance to this town, the activities of this board. You know, if I could sit further away, I would.
Okay, welcome back. Why don't you get into some of the details and specifics as to what happened?
So it's interesting, this social, again, he was refusing to indicate that as of November 1st, and this meeting was on November 5th, there had been a huge change in the command structure of the police department. You know, Deputy McKenzie had resigned effective November 1st. But the board continued to keep that a secret. They kept arguing, or used as a shield, it was to protect the complainant. But clearly their conduct is such that they're not protecting the complainant. They wouldn't even say that Deputy McKenzie had resigned. This wasn't about protecting the complainant. It's about protecting their political ally. They rallied around their political
And when you
ally.
say they, who are you referring to specifically?
Chairman McKenzie and Mark Gallivan. I got to say that Mr. Barrett was very in favor of getting as much information.
Chairman O'Neill, did you mean?
Chairman O'Neill
O'Neill.
and Mark Gallivan.
Right.
Yep.
You mentioned Chairman McKenzie, but
I'm sorry,
you-
Chairman O'Neill.
O'Neill.
I
And-
I misspoke when I said
Right.
McKenzie. Mr. Barrett, the meeting in which this.
who's a
occurred-
newly elected selectman.
Yeah, this was like his 4th or 5th meeting. I don't think he
Ran into a
realized
hornet's
what he
nest.
was going. Yeah, he walked into a hornet's nest. He relied on the representations of Mr. O'Neill and Mr. Gallivan. I don't really think he understands or understood the gravity of the situation. It's tough. I personally, I come from a background of having represented police officers, worked in municipal government for 13 years. I walked into the situation knowing right away that I was not going to vote for this agreement. To me, Mr. McKenzie was either going to get fired or we were going forward with a hearing, and I didn't like the agreement. So, and what you see in the video is a constant effort to shut me up. They reread that ethics provision twice during the meeting and you can see the entire meeting on walpolemedia.tv if you want to check that out. But they were using the ethics provisions of you can't release private information from this meeting as a sword or a shield to keep me from talking.
Right.
And, the law isn't set up for that. The law is set
Right.
up for people to learn what's going on. Fact is, they say, well, it's a personnel matter. It's a, there's a, when they released so that they have now since released, we've gotten the entire minutes released. You have it there?
Yeah, I have them. The redacted minutes you want?
Yeah,
Right there.
you
Those
can
are
see
redacted
that,
minutes.
there's a lot missing.
Right, I noticed that. There's
And if
there's a
you
lot
know,
blacked out there.
if you can get this on the town's website and kind of get the story, but they also released something I was asking for in that meeting, which was an opinion by town council, which supports the redactions. But it's
Right.
interesting, town council serves at the pleasure of the majority of the board. I have a funny story from when Cianci was mayor of Providence. A solicitor got an assignment that said, oh, the city council wants to know the answer to this question. And the city solicitor said, and the answer is no. Right?
Right,
So,
right.
and what's the first question an appraiser asks when you hire them? When I hire an appraiser for a project, the appraiser always asks me, do you represent the buyer or the seller, right?
Right.
It's clearly professionals, there is some leeway where you make decisions. It's clearly the case here with the majority holding the purse strings for the town council.
Right.
They're going to go this particular way. They got it mostly right in that document. However, what they leave out is an important case, Worcester Telegram and Telegraph. Worcester Telegram and Gazette versus the city of Worcester. And what that case was about was a request for records of police misconduct. And what the court said is, yeah, although public records requests don't allow us to release personnel records, there's an overwhelming interest on the part of the general public in what their police department is doing. When we issue these guys guns and badges, there's an extra amount of scrutiny that they should be expecting, and that that is allowed. And that that case actually says the investigation of these issues is actually a public record. Town council leaves that out.
Right. Now, you did make a statement, I was reading in the report, that the condition the employee was in when entering an establishment could have been grounds of termination.
Yeah, that's in both sets of minutes. So
Right.
I think, that was part of the notes, and then it became part of the extended minutes. I'm still waiting for the records to come out of the investigation. So I don't want to talk a lot about that, but my point there was that, the other members of the board, Mr. O'Neill in particular, had already come up with a cover story as to why we were going to keep this all secret, and that was we were going to protect the victim, that we didn't want to make the victim testify, or we didn't want. And my point to that was, you know what? We really didn't need the victim to testify. We had enough evidence at that point to go forward and terminate this employee. More will come on that as the details come out. But that was my point at saying that, even if, there was some concern that, the story wouldn't hold water or whatever, then I'm like, to me, not only did I think the story was, a valid story, I felt that we could have we as public safety commissioners, I mean, that's one of our roles. We are the boss of the police department, the civilian control over the police department, that we had to take this action. And even his conduct when he walked into the building was such that I think it was valid to ask for his resignation or remove him. And that's what that statement was about.
Right. I think the viewers might see it too as, I know there's certain personnel records off limit with the Freedom of Information public records request, but as you pointed out, in some cases maybe public safety officials are not exempt from that. But I think the viewers, and myself personally, I feel too, I know they were protecting the victim here. I don't know what happened, much about the incident, or if it was actually a crime that was committed, I have no idea. But when they say they want to protect the victim, they should also keep in mind that if anything did serious happen of this nature, they should also be protecting the residents of the town from further acts committed by certain individuals.
Well, that's the importance of this thing. We entrust in police officers, and some of them really young, 22 and 23-year-olds, a huge amount of authority, right? We give them this badge and this gun that confers on them a huge responsibility.
Right.
And we as public safety commissioners, have the responsibility of making sure that when we do that, we give it to people who are capable of handling that authority, and that when they show us that they are not capable of handling that authority, that we take that gun and that badge away from them. The board itself was content to just take the gun and badge, the Walpole badge, away from them, but they basically set up this entire scheme so that the individual, Deputy McKenzie, would have 90 days to go get another job or go get another job afterwards. They weren't content enough. All of them, without question, I give them credit for this, felt that he did not deserve to be a Walpole police officer. That was not a question. But they're willing to let him get a gun and a badge somewhere else, and I think that's problematic. To me, having been involved in cases of police misconduct, having, seen, worked in the City of Providence's law department and seen these cases, to me, there was no question in my mind that this person should never be issued another gun and badge. And in fact, he almost became the chief of CCOMP during this
Wow.
process. So
And what was the police chief's take on this?
you'd
I
have
know
to
he-
ask him. But
he
I
was-
will tell you this.
Sounds like he was kind of between a rock and a hard place, a tough decision.
Well, it's a tough all around. I mean, I like Nancy. I do respect Nancy. I like Chris. I like the family. But and I went through. When we first were dealing with this, there was a week I did not sleep. This is
it's tough on
a
everybody.
it's a horrible situation. I got to the point where it was like, well, this is not something that I created. This is something that I have to deal with, and I have to do what I have to do. I'm getting blowback for doing that, but and it's a close community. I think both of them are lifelong residents of the town. They have lots of friends here. The police department is a small department. There's a lot of friendships there. It's it's ripping at the heart of this town. It really is.
Yeah.
But
Very unfortunate incident.
but you have to you have to do what you have to do. You can't be protecting your political allies, and that's
Right.
what the result of this
Right.
is. And one more thing about the chief, and he has been above board and handled this. He's friendly with. They've worked together. They came on the force at the same time. They're both on the force at started the same year. So they've gone through this. It's ripping. It's tough on him as well. But I would say, the police department has handled this with grace and professionalism. And as far as whether or not a crime is committed, and this is very important. People are saying, well, they covered up a crime. The police department has not covered up a crime. The Board of Selectmen dealt with this solely as a personnel issue. This was about personnel, nothing about we don't have any capacity in a criminal nature in these things.
Right.
If a crime had been committed, and I did not evaluate it as to whether or not his conduct arose to a criminal conduct, that would not be something that the Board of Selectmen will do or the Walpole Police Department.
Right.
If the complainant decides that they want to pursue this as a criminal matter, they've been directed to go directly to the district attorney's office.
Right.
And so any statement about, crime being brushed under the rug, no. The police department has acted exactly how they're supposed to act in these circumstances. Chief
Right.
Carmichael having, acted exactly how he's supposed to act under these circumstances. And so if there's dissatisfaction, it's
Right.
not the police department.
Right.
You have a good police department,
Right.
Don't worry about the police department. And it's the Board of Selectmen that's failed you, not the
Right.
police department.
Well, we have elections coming up in the future, so the voters can express their concerns through elections. And also, I did have the police chief, Carmichael, on my show. He's a stand-up guy, and I'm sure he acted accordingly. But one thing, we only have a couple minutes left before we close, but I've heard rumors on the streets there might be a recall effort now against some of the selectmen that voted for this agreement. What are your thoughts on that?
Recall's kind of drastic. We do have an election coming up. The majority, having one group in the majority of the board for years and years and years has created a situation that that leads to this. This is like a perfect storm, right? You have a member of the board. You have it's the member of the board's spouse. So you have nepotism, and you have the same group in power for 15, 20 years. And this incident,
Welcome to Massachusetts.
well, and this incident is a perfect storm of those
Right.
things coming together.
Right.
And I, the voters ought to look at that and try and change the majority of the board. Only one member's up. I think recall's a drastic thing. When all the facts come out, if the public, outrage is sufficient, I suppose they might go forward with a recall. But I don't know. I think the ballot box is sufficient.
Right. Well, I always appreciate your honest opinion of everything, and I really appreciate you standing up for a more open and transparent government. And I appreciate you coming on the outside view.
We've really been here for an hour?
We've been here for an hour.
Boy,
30 seconds left.
I like to talk, or you get me to talk. I don't know what it
Absolutely.
is.
Well, again, thanks for coming on. I look
Thank you
forward
very
to
much.
maybe some additional shows you can come on with some of your colleagues, and we appreciate you and all your hard work and public service with the people.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to everybody
Merry
as well, and happy holidays.